Today, we are going to be talking about knowledge in action. I want you to think about first and foremost about the cliche. It says knowledge is power. And do you believe that knowledge is power? Think about that. I would argue that knowledge is not power. As a matter of fact, knowledge is, well, just knowledge. Until you do something with it, knowledge is just information. Our modern era, we can find information practically everywhere. You can be on the bus, you can be on the train, you can be at home, and in the power of your hands, you have more access to information than anyone else in history. So what do you do with all that information, or in many cases, that misinformation? And I think that is where the distinction of today and what critical thinking and putting into action really comes into hand. The reality is that knowledge is just information in your head. Until you do something with that, there is no power to it. So knowledge in action is power. And that's truly where you want to start focusing in. Now, what do you do today in today's era when there is so much information and misinformation available? Well, the first thing you may want to start doing is to narrow down your sources by selecting, well, credited sources. And how do you go about creating credited sources? Well, there are the usual suspects, right? The .edus, right? You can go into different colleges and start looking at their information. Some of the most known informations, be Harvard Business Review seems to have a very strong, unbiased opinion, so at least we believe to be unbiased and closer to a truth. You can also go to the GSB, which is Stanford's Graduate School of Business. They would also put out information that you can look into and feel that it has been tested and challenged and recorded, but many other institutions. But the reality is that there is more than just that, right? There are going to be formal publications. The Wall Street Journal seems to be another credible source of information. And you can start looking online for places that you believe would have the most credible information. But here's one thing that I want you to start thinking about is that if we always look at the same source of information, it seems like we're always going into the same circles of information. And I want you to think about the yin and the yang for a second. The yin and the yang is a philosophical concept that describes opposites, yet interconnected forces, meaning that together they make the true picture or a reality. So one of the things that I often profess is that I do not let contrarian beliefs hinder my personal growth. Just because, well, something is in the opposite camp of what I believe to be true, it doesn't mean that there isn't some truth yet on the other side. Could it be at some point that I'm wrong? Could it be at some point that the information that I've been getting is not really getting me to where I need to be? So I look at contrarian beliefs as sort of the yin and the yang of information, particularly in media. If you're looking at the political ideology, right, it doesn't mean that, if you're all in one side of the wing of the spectrum, could that be true? And is it true all on the other side of the spectrum? Or can there be somewhere in the middle that'll be a reality, a truth? Could it also be that it's a circumstantial truth because you're in a different situation at that point, and therefore this truth right now seems to be the most possible? But as time changes, well, so does your thinking and your ability to see things. So the yin and the yang of information, it's a great place to start if you want to start putting more knowledge in action, because now you put in everything that you believe to be true or things that you want to come out under scrutiny. The part when you start taking off and thinking differently, because now you start scrutinizing and you start asking questions. And the questions could be open-ended questions, but in truth, you want to get to a point where you start living your life and start asking questions and getting to a more of a binary situation. Think about it from the concept of yes, no, pass or fail. If you start thinking about ideas that you're working with, can you get to a situation where you have to start narrowing down the big concepts into pass, fail, yes, no? And if there is too much gray in between these answers, this means that you still have to narrow down even further. The reality is that the reduction of great concepts into smaller segments of concepts would allow you to start seeing things with a lot more clarity. And the reason why this matters is because the more clarity you put into your thought process, the more clarity you have into the next step, is going to allow you to take a really good step forward, which means it allows you to take action with more confidence. I have students that have taken my classes in the past, and it says, that their biggest challenge is that they have analysis paralysis, where it says, I got so much information, I don't know which way to go, I don't know what to do. And the reality is that without a true process of scrutiny or a true process of critical thinking, it will not allow you to make a decision. You're going to come to an impasse where you have decision fatigue, because you're decision fatigue, you've been deciding about this, and that, and when it comes down to it, you're just tired. Sometimes you just have to walk it off, take a break, come back to the subject matter later. If you don't have already a trust circle, or you have a brain trust that, people that you can go and, set these questions and see what their answers come up in a, pass, fail, yes, no type of scrutiny, then eventually you can get to a position where now you have better decision-making abilities. And I think that is the key concept in an entrepreneur or a business person, is that having to be able to make decisions that are going to give you the best possible answer, the best possible result. So as you start creating this binary process thinking, yes, no, pass, fail, you start thinking, how do I make the next step forward? One of the biggest takeaways that you want to have is that in the olden days, we used to call it show your work, right? Show your work so that we know what you've done. And I've always been a big believer in showing your work. Well, let me rephrase that. Not always. But when I got to advanced calculus in college, I realized that if there was a mistake made, and I found out at the end of the equations, I didn't know where the mistake was if I stepped the process, if I didn't write down one simple process. It could have been a negative sign that was not written, or it could have been a plus sign that it wasn't written, and that gave me a different answer. And it would be really, really hard to improve, to find a solution if I didn't know how it was written. It's the same thing that I apply in life, is the same thing that I suggest you apply in your life, is that you start thinking about everything that you do. And if you become so bold as to write it down and start asking your questions, is this the right thing to do? Yes, no. Let's take, for instance, just waking up in the morning. If you start considering what time do you wake up, and you wake up, what is your first thoughts? What are you thinking about? What's going on? And if you become this as a practice on a daily, is this the right process for you to live your everyday life? Is this leading to the life that you want to live? Are you living, as we mentioned earlier, by choice or by chance? Do you live in efficacy? Efficacy means, do you live with the intended results that you set off to do? And you will know this if you know that your process is one, efficient and effective. Right? You want it to be efficient, meaning that you do not want to waste anything. And you want it to be effective, meaning that you want to have the intended results. Sometimes you can have an effective result that is not efficient. And this is the opportunity that by writing down your process, whatever it is that you're working on, if you write it out and you can see what the process is, you can go back into methodologies of process improvement. And process improvement is one of the greatest things that we have in our modern age, because we can take what is created by different people and improve just a small slither and create a better result. And process improvement in technology, in manufacturing, in business, in the way that we're thinking, it will make us move forward. Can you apply this to your daily life? I know sometimes it will look a little silly to, figure it out when you wake up, and do you brush your teeth? Do you take a shower in the morning? You take a shower at night? What is the right process for you to have the best possible outcome for your day? At the end of the life, when you reduce what's important, the most important to you and why, you start looking at, the most things that are important for me are things that are important to you. So if they're important to you, it doesn't matter if they're important to me. It doesn't matter if they're important to someone else. What it really matters is it important to you. Can you apply those rules to your life so that you could also have the best possible outcome? I know showing your work may not seem one of the things that you may want to start doing, because it takes time. It's a process. But those that take the painstaking time to write it out, to figure it out, will actually be able to go back and figure out where the problem is, so you can address the problem, improve upon it, and then now have a better outcome. In business is the same way, right? Whatever business you're in, you want to look at what are your processes. If you are in the business of creating, uh, hamburgers, right? The perfect example would be McDonald's. McDonald's didn't really become McDonald's in the beginning because, well, they were, the greatest burgers on earth. They had a great process. And then eventually, it was because of real estate and so on and so forth. But the process that they have in McDonald's, that's really what they set them in the key of stardom. So as you start looking at improving your life, what processes can you improve? Where are you right now in terms of improving results? And then once you know what the process is, once you put it through a binary, now you have a clear path of action. And having clarity in action, it gives you the empowerment to make the right decisions. And this is part of the key on knowledge in action, is how do you get to the knowledge and how do you start creating the action part? So let's talk about the action part. The action part is, well, very interesting, because now we start talking about habits, right? Action means what is it that you do? And at the end of the day, we are the sum of our actions, not the sum of our thoughts. And our actions are driven by our thoughts. So that's why sometimes it gets very, very confusing as far as to identify who we are and what do we do. But in reality is, well, we are the sum of our actions, not our sum of our intent or the sum of what we thought we wanted to do, but we actually did. It doesn't mean that when you fail that you're a failure. When you fail, this means that you temporarily have been defeated. And a temporary defeat is great. It gives you the opportunity to go back, look at what you did. If you have written it down, you can identify the point of failure, right? And then you can go ahead and correct that, so that therefore you can get now a better outcome on the next time around. When I first started my life on entrepreneurship, right, I was like, oh man, we've learned a lot. We failed, but we learned a lot. I was like, I don't want to learn a lot. I want to win, right? I don't want to learn through failure. But you just got to work through those temporary defeats, right? And you can't be afraid of temporary defeats if you have a right process. If the right process will indicate the next outcome will be more possible of success, then you will be significantly more inclined to make that happen. And so this is the process, right? This is the process now of what is the action. So there are many ways that you can look at your actions, right? You can look at your habits, and you are the sum of your habits. You are the sum of your habits of what you eat. You are the sum of your habit of how you sleep. You are the sum of your habits of what you read, of what you watch. If you start looking at the content online, those are pretty much summarizing what is it that you're going to be doing. So in essence, you have, well, all control by and large of what your habits could be. There's a great book. It's called The Atomic Habit, and I will put it on the notes so that you guys can look into it. And The Atomic Habit is, for me, one of the better action-driven habits books written in recent time. It is a little bit intellectually nerdy, if you will, because it does talk about, if you do this plus that, it will equal to this, which is sometimes exactly what people need. It needs to be a reductive analysis of what you can do, and start it with the simplest form so that you can approach through a greater or a highest form. And sometimes where people are in the process of achieving, let's say, greatness, whatever greatness means to you, sometimes you're focused so far ahead in the greatness that you haven't been focused in the incremental steps that are going to get you to greatness, right? So those are some of the things to consider. Some of you guys may know that I've completed an Ironman, and recently I completed the World's Championship in Nice, France. Didn't just wake up one morning and say I'm going to swim 2.5 miles and ride a 112-mile bike and run a full marathon right after. There was incremental lengths that were done over time, extending the swim, extending the bike, extending the run, to the point that eventually I can complete a full Ironman. This is no exception to anyone that has really done an Ironman in the past. Is the incremental improvements. Every day you create a habit, you improve your process, you move it forward. This is the same thing with any goal that you want to do. If you want to create a long distance term, or if you are in the building of your business, well, the business is not going to be built overnight. You will have a vision of where you want to go, but the incremental step by step, and knowing what that incremental step needs to be, that knowledge in action is what is going to create that ability to create something great for you. And the more people it'll create an impact for, well, the greatest the perceived impact is going to be enlarged by society. And so that's some of the key takeaways that you want to have, is that in order for knowledge to truly be in action, well, it has to be measurable. In order to measure, you want to write it down. And if you actually write it down, you can start seeing the steps. And if you start seeing the steps, you can improve the smaller steps so that you can become more efficient, creating the effective results. And therefore, you can live a life by choice with efficacy, is that you manage your day-to-day tasks, right? Do you go back regularly and examine that your process, not the results, that your process was at its optimum? By scrutinizing the process, will guarantee a better result in the future. We'll see you next time.